Okay. Welcome everyone to Brainstorm Live. Today we have Dr. Crystal Collier again. You might recognize her from her last presentation about the Neuro Whereabouts Guide. She is I'm going to put this in the right order, therapist, educator, and author.
Yeah.
And she shared, if you want to know more, here's her website, and you can read her bio there. But go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Alexandra. And greetings, you guys. It's really an honor to be back with you. So the last time I was here, I got to share about my first book, The Neuro Whereabouts Guide, which is a neurodevelopmental guide for parents and youth, as well as school administrators, clinicians who want to prevent risky behavior. And I was able to do a literature review on the neurodevelopmental effects of 18 different risky behavior, graphed them in the book so parents could see when those spike, so they know when to have their conversation. And then, of course, when parents say, how do I talk about that? The book comes with a script and a checklist with all the things that they need to know to share with their kids. No more than 2 to 4 pages per topic, and it was written in infographic style to make it fun to read since people don't read as much today. So in January of this year, I published my second book, which is called FOO Mapping. And let's see, where's it? Let me grab it right here. This one is a workbook. And it's much smaller. My first one was 413 pages. This one is about 220. And the subtitle is An 8-Week Journey to Map the Family of Origin Patterns That No Longer Serve You. So let me share with you the story behind FOO Mapping. So a friend of mine said, you make up words for your titles. And it didn't even occur to me that I do that. So the neuro whereabouts is the idea there is to know your child's neurodevelopmental stage so that you can protect that brain development. But in FOO Mapping, the idea is to look back and reflect on what happened to you during the specific neurodevelopmental stages so that you know how your brain was wired and then you can make changes in that wiring. And so probably it's been about 17 years since I've been doing FOO mapping. I made up a word, family of origin mapping. And the way it started is I had this little tiny whiteboard in my office and I would draw a button, much like you see on my whiteboard right here. I've got, the button drawn and the event that created the button. So of course it's a metaphorical button, but we all have them. And so then of course I bought one to represent my button. And so here's my FOO button, and my FOO button sits right here on my chest. And when my FOO button is pushed, I feel like there's an elephant sitting on my chest. And here are the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that are attached to this button.
I'm not good enough. Be perfect. Feel shame and guilt when I make mistakes.
So this button, when it would get pushed out in the world, not always was it pushed, but there were certain things that triggered it and pushed it. And what I would do is really regress to either around 8 years old or around 16 years old. And when I regressed to 8, I just didn't feel good enough. I would hustle for worthiness. I would do whatever I could to get you to like me. I would do whatever I could to please everyone around me. And this really came from growing up with a mom who has borderline personality disorder and is really highly critical, very gaslighting. There's always a zinger coming after anything that she says. And so I'm always kind of bracing for how I'm going to get criticized. Growing up in that environment created this FOO button, and it really feels like I can't breathe. So I started noticing that other people have these buttons. And so, and they carry this energy in different places in their body. One of my clients, her FOO button is in her left shoulder. And when she starts to talk about her family of origin, her shoulder starts to go up like this. And then I'll say, hey, do you think your button's pushed? And she goes, oh my God, like she can't really feel it, but she looks at it. It's so funny. Another one of my clients, when his FOO button's pushed, he crosses both of his legs and he crosses both of his arms across his lower abdomen. And so, or genital area. That's where that energy is for him. For another one of my clients, she has this kind of a guttural noise that she makes. I don't know. And it's just a really interesting noise. And when we did her mat, we discovered that her voice was really taken away from her growing up in a very patriarchal environment. And so this gurgling noise really represents where that energy gets stuck in her body. So it could be your heart, your stomach, your bowels, your genitals, your back. Sometimes people have such bad muscle aches in their shoulders. I call that the Atlas button. The weight of the world is on your shoulders, right? Or migraine headaches. We hold energy, feeling, emotional energy in our body. So what I wanted to do was help people map where that energy is being held, what thought, feeling, and behavioral patterns were attached to it. And then once we realized the origin, the age, we came up with this kind of 3-step process to move out of it. So being able to be aware of when the button's pushed and then unpush it, identify what age energy you're in. When I'm in my 16-year-old energy, I'm like F you to the world. And I get really oppositional and just give up. This is not a pattern that has served me well in life either. But when I'm in either energy, I can identify it and unpush my button, move back into my healthy adult energy and create new neural networks for healthier patterns. And that's really how the story goes. So I've been doing a lot of maps. I've been training people in maps for years. I've got a couple of clinicians here in Houston that practice in my office and people out there who do FOO mapping. So if you are a clinician and you would like to do FOO mapping, it would be such an honor to help you learn how to do it. Although it's a pretty simple technique. We all do a lot of family of origin work in our jobs. But this particular presentation is going to share with you the 5 neurodevelopmental stages that I take clients through. And having my clients now work out of this workbook is such a cool honor because I've been doing it just with them in person for years. But what I found is that people don't realize that the origin of these negative patterns has everything to do with the experience they had growing up. It's almost as if people don't want to blame their experience, their environment. Well, I'm an adult now, like I can choose differently. And although that is true, there's a dialectic at play here. What is also true is you have deep layers of neuronal wiring that actually you can't just go in and change. So if you guys remember from last time, I showed this picture, which is my favorite research article that shows you dendrite growth throughout, or cell growth throughout the first couple of years of life. So dendrites are my favorite brain structure because those tree branch looking things, and of course the tree root looking things, because those are literally the hardware of learning. When you learn something new or practice something, you grow more dendrites that reach out to other neurons and thicken into networks. And that's why I so love this study, because it really shows you what a skill. Like this is all the way up to age 2. You're literally looking at a skill that this child has learned. We don't know what skill, but it's what's going on. So I like to show this picture, and I've got this picture in the book. That's where I start with people when I first meet them, is say, okay, have you ever noticed that some of these patterns are so hard to change? Especially relational patterns. People say all the time, oh my God, I married my mother, I married my father, and now look what's going on. It's the same kind of pattern. Why do I keep repeating this? And you can go to all these wonderful self-help things, different great psychologists, good therapies, and it doesn't still change the behavior. It's really interesting because one of the most widely used and studied therapies, cognitive behavioral psychology, has great short-term outcomes and sucky long-term outcomes. Like if you really look long-term, you can see, because people go, oh, yes, I have automatic negative thoughts. I'm going to change those patterns. I'm going to use these techniques. And then they don't practice them. And so their wiring stays the same. Now, what we also know is that after the age of 25, right, your brain is harder to rewire, and it becomes harder the older you are. The old saying, old dog, right, new tricks. It's so difficult because the first 25 years of life, these skills, your executive functioning skills, hardwire depending upon the experience and development that you've had. And so from birth to puberty, the first real, major stage of brain development, when we grow 200 billion neurons, our basic executive functioning skills are really maturing. And then we get to that second phase of brain development from puberty to about 25, when we lose half of our neurons. And what's growing are dendrites, wiring the brain based upon our experience. And so this is when higher level executive functioning skills come online that really govern your problem solving, your career trajectory, your relational success or failures, right? These are our basic skills. And what happens though is that we may not grow these depending upon what we're doing or not doing. If we're not using them, they don't grow because the brain's rule is use it or lose it. And so if we have a parent who's over functioning for us, then we don't grow lots of problem solving decision-making skills. We actually grow long networks for dependency. And then we grow up and we are dependent upon other people for a lot of things, our emotional safety, security, success, all those financial, all that stuff. If we don't have a lot of opportunity to control our impulses or face a lot of consequences for not controlling our impulses, then we have poor self-control and we suffer that for a long time. So I think that what's really important, if you're a clinician and you're working with somebody, is to be able to say, yes, these patterns will haunt you because of your brain's wiring. Now, if you grew up in an environment where life was wonderful and good and safe and consistent, you're probably going to have fantastic wiring that you can use as an adult and create the same thing. But if any of these things happen to you, if you had attachment issues, abuse, neglect, trauma, substance use, abandonment, violence, chronic stress, overindulgence, right, overfunctioning parents or environments, then you're going to have brain wiring that may not serve you really well in your adulthood. And you may also be very attracted to the same types of behaviors and environments because that is what your brain knows, right? It's amazing when I work with clients who are married to narcissists, right? They grew up with an alcoholic parent or a parent who was really hyper controlling and narcissistic themselves. And they swore, I would never, ever, ever marry another or be with another narc. And here they are, they end up with the same type of thing. But they have lots of brain wiring, right, for capitulating, for being dependent, for people pleasing. And that attracts people who want that in their life, right? So how do we change that? Okay, first, you have to look at the origin of it. And so when we think about family of origin, I always think about systems theory. And systems theory, one of the best examples is a child's mobile, right? So this is such a great metaphor for a family. Every family has a central part of their system. It could be a house that we all revolve around. It could be a person that controls everything. But then each individual family member, just like in a mobile, turns and rotates inter and independently of that central system. Now, all systems have a homeostatic balance. And in families, if it's consistent and safe and loving and warm and full of good, healthy limits, we're going to have a nice balanced homeostatic relationship. But if one of the things that I showed you on the previous screen are occurring, it's going to throw your homeostatic balance off, but it doesn't stop, right? The mobile continues to go around as we continue to go out, live our lives, make money, feed ourselves, all that stuff. But that cattywampus homeostatic balance, if it continues for years and years and years, our brain grows in development in relationship to that. It feels very normal to us. So we have to be able to go back and say, where did those patterns begin? In your FOO, it could have been in your SOO, your society of origin. It could have been in your RU, your religion of origin, or maybe even your COO, your culture of origin. So I'm making up some more acronyms here. But so I have permission to share this story with you because this particular client has not been a client of mine for about a decade. And we've actually gone together and done presentations on family of origin. And he always lets me share his story. So this young man was born a woman and was born in Pakistan and was also born Muslim. And so for the first 8 years of life, he wore boyish clothes, had a boy haircut, and ran around with the boys, his brothers and the kids in the neighborhood. And then when he turned, I think it was not at 8, I think it was 11, year 11, when girls go through the transition into womanhood, he had to wear a full black burqa, no boys' clothes anymore, and had to grow hair. He describes it as his world going completely dark, figuratively and literally. And so his family of origin wounded him. His society of origin created more shame. His religion of origin told him that he was wrong and that he was a girl and that his feelings of being a boy from birth were absolutely wrong and irrelevant. And so we started to do his FOO map and found out that he had a SOO map and a RU map as well, right? And like a cultural layered on top of that. So lots of wiring happening there. Okay, so a FOO button, I just see a button, like, and it's so funny because whenever I'm interacting with people out in the world and I see a pattern, I always think, ooh, I wonder what their FOO button is. And when people are, you know, they touch themselves in certain places or, you know, they kind of repetitively do a specific thing, I always think, ooh, I wonder if that's where that energy is being held in their body. And so I started seeing kind of these FOO buttons there, and they're really, the origin of them is the wounds or the traumas that happen. So they don't have to be traumas. They could just be something that happened once or repetitively that created a wound. And so I'll give a good example of that. I was doing a FOO workshop for a company, actually, a nonprofit that does a lot of work in the community, emotional work with healing the community. And so we did a FOO workshop for the employees. And this one woman rose her hand and she said, I grew up in a really happy, healthy environment. I don't have any FOO issues. And I said, okay, well, are there any negative patterns in your life that you repeat that you don't like? Just maybe something small that you don't like about yourself. And immediately she figured out that yes, she does not raise her hand in meetings. And she wished she did. Very, very simple. So what I did was I had them go, and I can do this in therapy too. I had people go back in that workshop and imagine when that behavior started. So you think about the negative pattern that you engage in repetitively that's not serving you. And you imagine going back in time. First of all, it's really helpful to do what's called an affect bridge, where you think about the feelings that you have when you don't fail to use your hand or when you're engaging in whatever negative behavior pattern that is. really steep yourself, almost like a cup of tea. You steep yourself in all those emotions. You do some deep breathing, and then you let your mind wander back to the first time you felt that way, the first time you did that. And immediately she was like, bam, after the guided image, she said, I was in class one day when I was 8 years old, so 3rd grade, and I was so excited. I had my hand raised, ooh, 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 call on me. And her teacher said, oh, Maria, you're really excited today, aren't you? Was really shaming and sarcastic to Maria. That's when she never raised her hand evermore after that. So that's a beautiful, although sad, example of a FOO button. It's not a huge trauma, but it's something that happened that wounded her and changed her thought, feeling, and behavior pattern. So prior to that, she had really thought that raising your hand in class was good, that she was smart, that she was capable. She felt confident. She rose her hand enthusiastically after she was shamed publicly by her teacher just one time. It created a core belief that it's not safe to raise your hand. It's not safe to give answers and opinions. The feeling that she got was shame and fear, and the new coping mechanism was to just keep that hand down and don't share. So now, today, in her life, she'll be in a meeting. This button gets pushed, and it regresses her back to 8 years old, and she just does what she learned how to do there. Then, neurodevelopmentally, what happens? That new thought process, like I'm not safe to share. The new emotional process, fear, insecurity, shame. The new coping mechanism, keep your hand down, don't talk. That grew dendrites, new networks, that now, as an adult, reinforce the ones that started when she was 8 years old. Network that does not serve her. Okay, so what's I think interesting is that when I meet couples, it's pretty obvious to me how they push each other's FOO buttons. So I'm going to use an example that my husband has given me permission to use. Okay, so of course, you guys heard my FOO button, right? It comes from a critical mother. So I learned how to be critical, and I learned how to just be perfectionistic to earn love and attention, because the only thing that worked there was to make really good grades and be exceptional, right? So that my mother would be happy with me. And so when I make a mistake, my FOO button gets pushed. And when my husband makes a mistake, my FOO button gets pushed. And so what I do when my FOO button's pushed is I go either, oh my God, what can I do to have you like me and back in your favor? Or I go angry, like we need to fix this and we'll fix it now. And so when I get to that angry place, when my button's pushed, I push his FOO button. He grew up with an alcoholic father who also has a mom who is very critical herself, but in a little bit different way. And so what he has learned how to do in his family of origin is what I call going turtle, which is withdrawing. So he just goes turtle. But when he withdraws, oh my God, it pushes my FOO button even more. And what do? I go for the throat, like I'm going in, like we got to fix this. We got to fix it now. And he, of course, this can just spiral out of control. And so what we didn't realize in the beginning is that we were pushing each other's buttons. We were triggering each other in different ways. And all those old networks were just kicking in. And so now what we do is I say, whoop, this is pushing my FOO button, and he stays in the room. Sometimes he grabs the corners of his chair, almost like he's bracing himself for impact. And he'll say to me, okay, what's going on? What's happening? He stays, I calm, we talk, and then we create new networks for trusting and working together. Okay, so that's what FOO mapping is, what it generally is all about. And now what I want to share with you is the process. So as a therapist, sometimes I do quick maps. It's pretty obvious. Somebody already knows their button. They say, oh my God, I think this, it makes me feel this way, and this is what I'm doing. And I quickly ask them, when's the first time you did it? Maybe do a brief guided imagery, and we map it. And we draw it on the board. They take a picture, and we create a new pattern of thinking, feeling, and behaving, and good somatic self-care. Or we can do it in an 8 to 12 week process. So when I do the longer process, I literally have people tell me their life story. And what I want to really know is how did their brain grow and develop during 5 different neurodevelopmental stages? Okay, so let me take you there into the stages. First one is birth to age 4. Now, what I ask people is, do you want to do the workbook, or do you want me just to give you some prompts? I remember when I was 23 years old, I got a new therapist. I was so excited. Many people said she was great. The first meeting, she said, you're going to have to buy a journal and bring your journal entries to me. I never went back because I hate journaling. I'm just not a journaler. And so I always tell my clients, you tell me, what you want. If you want to do the workbook, I've got a really great new book for this. Or if you just want me to give you some prompts, you can email the answers to me. You can say them in, voice recording on your phone, but you just have to share that information with me when you come back. So I give them a choice. And then the first leg of our journey, we don't have a lot of memory. So most of you guys know, right, that we don't even have a fully formed hippocampus until we're 3 or 4 years old. And so that gives us something called infant amnesia. We don't remember what happened to us birth, usually to around 3 or 4. We have some fleeting memories. Now, here's what I found. In all the FOO maps that I've done, a few hundred by this point, I have seen that the first memory is very prophetic, very telling about the rest of the story that you're going to hear from that person. Quite interesting. So what I do is let people know that they need to do 2 things. They need to gather some baby pictures, some pictures of themselves during this time, because it usually triggers some memories, and call some safe people to be history bearers for them. And so they may call mom, dad. If those people are not safe, they may call brother, sister, aunts, uncles, anybody who might be able to shed some light. And I give them a few writing prompts. Those writing prompts are simple. Where were you born? Who did you live with? And what was life like for you? So here are what I'm looking for in that first neurodevelopmental stage. What is this person's temperament? So you guys probably know there are 3 types of temperament. You were either easy, you were either slow to warm up, or you were difficult. I think it sucks that those are the names, but I didn't do that research. But the research really bears out that there are really 3 very distinct types of temperaments. The basis for your personality traits are your temperament, how you showed up in the world. What's really important to know is, how did your temperament interact with your caregiver's temperament? Because that could be the first indicator of a FOO wound, right? If you got a difficult baby who was maybe really colicky or really crying, and you had a parent who was a slow to warm up or a difficult temperament themselves, that mismatch can cause lack of attunement and attachment. Now, the next thing's attunement and attachment. You guys have probably all seen the video Still Face, Dr. Edward Tronick from Harvard University. If you haven't seen that, let me know. I will send you the video link, or you can just look up Still Face Experiment, Harvard, and find it. It really shows a beautiful example of attunement between a securely attached child and her mother. Now, he's been doing these experiments for decades all over the globe to really understand how attachment is created between baby and parent, caregiver. So what we see in this video is mom and baby are interacting. And if you were to hook them up to an EEG machine, heart rate monitor machine, you'd see beautiful, harmonious readings. As baby and mom attune to each other, baby points, mom looks, mom knows nothing's there, but she looks anyway because she's attuning. Baby smiles, we smile. Baby grimaces, mom grimaces. Our mirror neurons are kicking in to help us connect to this helpless little infant so that we can help regulate them. So this is what is the basis for the process of co-regulation. Because you guys know babies can't regulate themselves. They don't even know they're a separate identity until they grow a theory of mind. And so what we see is that adults mirror the responses that we see in infants' facial expressions. And when we do that, we regulate them. They share that information back, we attune to it, and we get regulated. Now, when we dysregulate, they dysregulate, right? Because of this co-regulation process. Now, this is the basis for a couple of Erik Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. If our family is trustworthy and consistent, we learn, I can trust the world. If not, we mistrust, become hesitant, more slow to warm up, even if we were born with easy temperaments. If we're allowed to explore our world as a toddler, we develop a sense of autonomy and exploration. If not, we may develop a shame for being curious, a shame for going out and looking at what's going on in the world, depending upon what happened. So during this neurodevelopmental stage, what we really want to identify is, what is this person's attachment style? How was their brain wired? Were they wired in a very secure way that allows them to explore their world and trust and feel a sense of autonomy? Or were they one of three other more maladaptive coping mechanisms, attachment styles? So when I say maladaptive, it really is a terrible word, because we just adapt, right? Our brain, it grows based upon the interactions that we have in the environment, experience dependent. And so I think about anxious, ambivalent, kids. When they go to the park with mom, they stay really close to mom, attached to the leg, watching mom, because mom's been inconsistent. Mom has shown that she may not always be there. And so they have to be on edge. The avoidant kid and mom go to the park. Same thing. Mom's been inconsistent in unhealthier ways, or maybe avoidant herself. And so kid goes to the park with mom, stays pretty close with his or her back turned to mom. Disorganized kid and mom, they don't go to the park at all. But secure attached mom and kid go to the park. Secure attached kid, they go play, because they trust the world. They have autonomy. They turn around not to see if mom's there, but to see where mom is, so they can go back and get food and water when they need it. So we want to see how this brain was wired. Now, as an adult, this is what attachment styles look like. And just really briefly, what we want to find out is what their orientation is to the world. Okay, so I'm seeing some chats here. Let me just look. And Alexandra, if you can help me too. Interesting. Do you look at prenatal stages at all? A lot of research shows that any stress experience at that time, long-lasting effects, most definitely. A lot of times you could ask during that first stage, what was your parent going through? And then how would you work with such memories or believe, feel a burden from their mother, held in words, wombs, not wanting them? Oh, definitely. It's interesting that you say that. Hold on a second. That was really one of my cases too, because my mother used to say to me, Crystal, I was so looking forward to have you, because then I could have somebody who would love me unconditionally. Like, woo, that's a lot of pressure for a kid, right? How does that shape someone? Well, the way it shaped me was that, excuse me, it was my job to take care of my mother. And of course, the job that I ended up being in fit my core beliefs, right? Sorry, you guys, I have a little tickle. Okay, let me fix that before I move on. So we want to see the orientation with people. People who have secure attachment, they pretty much feel okay, and they think that most other people are okay. And it gives them a sense of trust and autonomy that they can function really healthily in the world. But if you have anxious and secure attachment, like I did, you feel like you're not okay, but everybody else is okay. So I always approached the world from this kind of one down position, and felt that I had to people please, I had to caretake everybody that I went to in order to fit in and feel loved. Or if you have avoidant attachment style, you may feel like you're okay, but everybody else is not okay. And so that may give you the impetus for staying really far away from people and not really connecting and being deeply intimate You might even dismiss other people. And if you grew up with a disorganized attachment style, it may be very, very confusing because you might be very fearful of intimacy while you desperately want it. You can see relationships as very painful, even though you're desperate for the approval of others. You may think you're not okay, the world's not okay, and that may be a very confusing place to live. I had a girlfriend once who had a disorganized attachment style. And I tell you, there were times when I felt so intimately close to her, and then other times when I felt so distant from her, and she would do things that were so hurtful to me in an effort to kind of push away. And I just finally, I had to be done with the relationship because it was just such an up and down roller coaster. I just couldn't do it. And I wasn't her therapist. So there you go. Okay, so if we keep going, what we see is our attachment styles are being created. Our parenting styles are affecting us. And so when you think about parenting styles, you can really think about, oh, wait, sorry, this is positive mirror. Oh, okay. This actually shows you a little bit of what you're seeing as far as what the parent does, the type of parent that creates this particular attachment style. Actually, I'm going to go to the next slide, which is more about parenting styles. Nope, actually, I'm sorry. Let me go backward. Ah, there it is. Okay, when we're looking at the kind of the next stage of life here, so there. Oh goodness, sorry you guys, my computer is not allowing me to. Here we go. Okay, so now we're going to go to the next neurodevelopmental stage that we would explore in our FOO map from about age 5 to 8 when we start school. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the old saying, you don't know anything's wrong with you until you go to school, because that's when you really start socially comparing. Hopefully you had a parent who just thought you were the bee's knees, and they always said you were such a great kid no matter what. But then you go to school and you start to be put into categories and you start to compare yourself. The Erik Erikson's stage here is initiative versus guilt. So if you have a really great parent who's loving, supportive, secure, and they help you really create initiative and validate that, if you have teachers that do that, awesome. The example that I made before, we see a teacher who shamed a kid for raising their hand, and so she ended up not doing it anymore. So her initiative was not fostered, and she ended up feeling some shame about that. Now, what we see happening for psychosocial development is that self-efficacy and self-esteem are either starting to go up or starting to go down. So self-esteem is more of an emotional state, how you feel, your worth, your value, and it can really go up and down in any given day. But self-efficacy is that feeling that you can have an effect on the world, that your initiative is worthy and worthwhile. So go out and do. And when self-efficacy goes up, guess what? So does self-esteem. And so we are seeing less and less of this in our kids today. I need to get a tissue. Give me just a second. Okay, sorry you guys, I am struggling with a summer cold, giving me a throat tickle and a runny nose. Okay, so what we also see is that kids are very concrete thinkers. All or nothing, my way or the highway, never, always. That happens a lot during here. What you find is that if an event happens during this stage, they get stuck in very concrete thinking. And so that's really the case for me, is when I make a mistake, I feel regressed back to age 8, like things are all bad. And so it's important to discuss this with people too, because of egocentrism. Egocentrism really stops at around age 5 or 6. So if a wound happens prior to that age, a lot of kids think that it's their fault. That comes from still being egocentric, which doesn't mean self-centered. It just means their brain has not evolved yet to know that the world does not revolve around them. I mean, the world is supposed to revolve around kids for quite a long time. And so if the world reflects safety, security, consistency, then internally we feel safe, secure, consistent, valuable, worthwhile. But if it doesn't, if it does the opposite, we may blame ourselves for that and then carry kind of the weight of the world on our shoulders. We're also in the stage of magical thinking. When we think, oh my God, you know, the world is, I'm invincible. There's still magic. There are supernaturals. There's like, you know, kids have such a fantastic imagination because of magical thinking, but it also can work against us when we think our parents are all powerful beings. And so here in this stage, what we see is attachment wounds and trauma bonds really begin to form. And so when you think about that, I want you to imagine parenting styles, because these really start affecting kids. So attachment styles are already created, and then we start seeing kids really reacting to parenting styles. So these are Baumgarten's 4 styles. And I really love this, except for the 2 names of authoritarian and authoritative, because they're too similar. But we're going to go with that because that's really what we have. And so what we know is that kids who are in the upper left quadrant and the bottom right quadrant have very similar negative outcomes. A lot of substance use, teenage pregnancy, school dropouts, behavioral problems, mood problems happen with those 2 styles. The bottom left quadrant, uninvolved, neglectful parents, those kids have the worst outcomes. The top right, which is a high level of warmth and love and a high level of limits and love, authoritative, those kids fare the best. So what we see is that depending upon what parenting style that you have, and this chart, I know it is very wordy, but it just shows you what kids look like depending upon their parents' parenting style. And so, of course, kids who grow up in very permissive or authoritarian, they have pretty negative outcomes, may even have lower self-esteem, poor social skills, trouble keeping friends, difficulty regulating emotions. The kids in uninvolved, neglectful parenting, they have those times 10, maybe even more withdrawn or more issues happening. And then, of course, our kiddos who grow up with authoritative styles, they have really good ability to negotiate their environments, socially match, and have less impulsive issues. And so then what we want to do is take a look at trauma bonding. So this primarily occurs between age 5 and 8 in our neurodevelopmental stages. Because of magical thinking, egocentricity, we still believe that this parent is our survival mechanism, because they are. And so when something bad happens, we attach to them even stronger. Very, very real and normal reaction to an abnormal situation. But as this trauma bond grows, networks of neurons are being created for that type of unhealthy bonding. Bonds us even harder. One of my first encounters with a kiddo who had trauma bonding, I did therapy with a 12-year-old whose mother had pimped her out for the past 3 years. And when I said to her, oh, you must be so mad and disappointed at your mother for doing that to you, she hit me. She literally stood up and slapped me in the face. I was able to move away, but then she really started to attack me. Later on, I got to talk to her and she was like, you can't talk about my mother like that. I didn't really, of course, I was my first year of therapy, so I know not to say things like that now, but I didn't really realize the extent of her trauma bond, that she would go to any lengths to defend her mother, even though her mother's behavior was reprehensible. So when you think about trauma bonding and how it affects attachment bonds with us, it's really interesting because, you know, of course, attachment bonds are made about a love, safety, security. You're separate, even though you're dependent. So there's this interdependency, lots of autonomy. Not in trauma bonds. Trauma bonds are really fear-based. They are about domination, like control. It's about managing the conflict between the parent and the child. And you're really, really never able to individuate and separate. And so you end up being very obedient or being very dominating in relationships. Okay, third neurodevelopmental stage, from age 9 to 12. What we want to analyze and look at here is our ability to create the feeling of industry, learning, mastering, creating, doing things versus inferiority, insecurity, not doing those things. I think we have an epidemic in our country right now with kids who feel inferior because they don't go out anymore. They're developing neuronal networks for staying home, playing video games, being on screens, isolating in their rooms. So they don't go out and create networking for all the fun things that we used to do during this time in our lives. And it's creating kids who are anxiety ridden and feel very inferior and scared of the world. This is also, of course, when puberty is coming on. I had a client yesterday. It was so simple. I usually deal with lots of kind of tough cases, but this kiddo's mom came in and they both sat and talked to me about how he was experiencing anger over nothing and experiencing social anxiety over things that he'd never experienced before. And so I was able to do a complete assessment on this really normal, healthy kid. And he was 12 and he was really starting puberty and his testosterone was going up and he was going through this stage, but nobody had ever really taught him about this. And so as soon as we said, oh yeah, that's what this is going on, he's like, oh, this is normal. Yes, this is normal. Okay, how do we deal with it? And we worked through it. But it's interesting too, because at around age 11, 12, we start going through that beginning of the second phase of brain development when our critical thinking starts coming online. Our critical thinking, abstract conceptual understanding, gives us the ability to imagine what we might be like as an adult and allows us to start moving through the beginning stages of differentiation and identity development. Now, we have a lot of transitions here because if parents don't know this is coming or they don't know how to deal with it, like the mom that I had yesterday, she gets so angry and upset that her child is more argumentative and gets upset. So I was able to coach her and say, oh, no, these are normal things. Let's talk about what power struggle worms to let go of and what consequences you can give for disrespectful behavior. And we'll go from there. So during this time, I think it's really important to ask people to analyze, what were your family rules? Did you have dysfunctional family rules where you didn't talk, trust, deal, or feel? Or did you have more functional, healthy family rules where you could talk, trust, feel, and deal? Now I want you guys to think about all the networking, the neurodevelopmental networking for these things. If you don't talk, you develop networking for being silent, for holding that energy in your body. If you don't trust your family of origin, that generalizes to the world. If you don't deal with your feelings, they can really hurt your internal organs. And then later you have, heart attacks or irritable bowel syndromes or different things like that. And so do we develop during these complex stages of puberty, the abilities to go out and conquer the world or to withdraw from it? And this is usually too when we see family roles really being created. Now, most of the time, it's important to remember that everybody plays these roles at certain times in their development, and they become very flexible. We can move in and out of them and learn. But in unhealthy family systems where there is a cattywampus homeostatic balance, these rules or roles become rigid and fixed. And then I was a family hero in my family. And of course, what do? I grow up and I marry somebody who is dependent upon a family hero, right? For that, just like my mom was. And so we see a lot of these roles happening and really being solidified during puberty, during the stages when we're growing independence. And so what happens too is during that stage is then kids don't get to individuate. I remember my mother really took it personally when I didn't want to hang out with her anymore, and she shamed me for it. And so instead of being allowed to go out and develop new relationships, I, was ending up being, having to spend many weekends with her when it wasn't that I didn't love her, didn't want to, but I really wanted to go be with peers, which are more important during that previous stage than any other. Okay, the next neurodevelopmental stage, our fourth stage, out of 5, what we're going through between 13 and 16 neurodevelopmentally, psychosocially, of course, is identity. This is when we're starting to figure out who we are. We have to try on a lot of different things. I had purple hair, I listened to metal bands, and then the next year I had this really conservative cut. The next year I was a surfer girl. I went through all of my phases until I figured out I kept a little bit of all of those to become who I am today. If we don't get to do that, we get really confused on our role. Now, my confusion came in my own ability to feel comfortable in my own skin. I needed approval from everything around me to do that. It's really nice now that I'm in my 50s to not need that anymore, but I didn't really feel that solid identity until like really early 30s when I did a lot of therapeutic work. Now, what we see is body image issues can become a big deal during this time. And if our parents shame us, we create neuronal networks for some really negative thinking and behaving patterns. Dating, sexuality, who we are, who we're not, those start coming online. I work with a lot of LGBTQ kids who, of course, now they are coming out with all kinds of different identities. They want to change their names. And when parents shame that because they feel offended, then you get kids really turning inward and doing some things like, self-injury or substance use or acting out. And then, of course, abstract reasoning is really starting to congeal as their self-concept starts to do the same. They may start novelty seeking because that's a part of building your identity is seeking new things, but this also can show up in negative behavior. Lots of argumentativeness during this time. A lot of parents will say to me, oh my God, why do they argue so much? And I say, because their brain is developing normally. And they're like, what? This is normal? Yes. If you don't see teens arguing, something is not probably right going on here, right? So we need to learn as parents how to handle that. Validate feelings, even though we may disagree with certain behaviors. Okay, so what we see during this neurodevelopmental stage is if there is alcohol in that system, children start showing these symptoms. We also see that if parents have alcoholism, they're parenting without a fully formed frontal lobe, and then kids start shutting off their frontal lobe, as this fMRI study shows. This demonstrates hypofrontality, the frontal lobe shutting off. All those beautiful executive functioning skills don't get to grow and develop and can really hamper the effect of higher level executive functioning skills. And of course, if there's a lot of fear in the family environment, it can look the exact same way because of the fight or flight response being on more often than not. Okay, now, if we look toward what we see as that emerging adult, we may see a parent or a kid who cannot mentalize with others. That type of arrested development can lead to what's called acquired narcissism or very poor mentalization, where we project, blame everybody else. We don't attune to others very well because that is a frontal lobe task. We don't have the capacity to really reflect. This is the stage when you really start to see some mental health problems, the onset of big personality disordered issues really starting to come to fruition and having negative effects on social, academic, and familial things. Okay, our last neurodevelopmental stage, a young adulthood, when independency versus autonomy are really growing. Also, intimacy versus isolation. So if you got a kid who does not have very good social skills, self-esteem, consistency at home, they're going to show up as having relational problems during this stage. This is really when we try on lots of different deeper intimacies and we have more long-lasting relationships. This is also when our frontal lobe gives us the ability to have morality, make decisions based upon what the right thing to do is instead of what if we're going to get caught or not. These things start to come online. Now we have kids in this stage who get into a double bind. Parents who overfunction for them and they can't get upset. My mom did everything for me, but they're so angry because my mom did everything for me and now I have no skills to function independently on my own. What we can also see is very overindulged, almost narcissistic, arrogant kids who just go out into the world and think the world is just going to give them everything like their parents did, and they fall flat on their face and now they're pissed and upset and depressed because the world is hard. And so to end this presentation, once you finish your FOO, you do a map. And so that map shares with you where in the body your button is, the core wounding events and the core ages that it happened, the core negative core beliefs, the thought process, the patterns, feeling patterns, core behavior patterns that you want to change. Then we create a treatment plan. Going forward, here's what we want to do to create new dendrites. But practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes new dendrites. So we have to practice these. This is why I think it's critical to be able to teach people how to simultaneously use cognitive therapy, affective therapy, and behavioral therapy all at once, and to reiterate that they have to practice this on a daily basis. So that's why I love to have couples and individuals come in after that and bring me situations where their button's getting pushed, and then we practice and role play and discuss how to put into practice these new patterns that will serve them so much better in life. Okay, this of course builds new networks and networks of thinking. We move out of concrete thinking into abstract and dialectical thinking. This is a page out of my Neuro Whereabouts Guide where I teach this to parents. It also helps us to integrate this 3-step process. Basically, when your FOO button is pushed, you have awareness. Oh, my button's pushed. Here is the old way that I thought, felt, and behaved when that happened to me when I was younger. My energy is about 8 years old. Oh, nope, I'm in the angry 16-year-old energy. Okay, what does my FOO map say I need to do instead? And then you go pick the appropriate new action and get support to integrate that into your life. Now, what we want is to create co-regulation with healthy humans that are available, secure, and responsive. The way we can do that is to practice in therapy, creating and cultivating new attachment styles, learning more, healthy, secure language, setting boundaries, and following the functional family role. Excuse me. Whoa, sorry, you guys. In effect, we want to create a new family of choice, our FOC. Our new family of choice will be with people who respect our boundaries, pull us up, use positive self-worth and esteem, and make sure that they hold us accountable for doing our own work, becoming safe, secure, available attachment figures in our lives. So that is the process of going through 5 neurodevelopmental stages to understand the negative patterns that no longer serve us. And the FOO Mapping book is available on Amazon. You can also take a look at some of the links on my website, drcrystalcollier.com, or reach out and email me for more information. So sorry, you guys, my summer cold is wreaking havoc on my sinuses today. I hope that, I think I finished right on time, but to give lots of room for questions. So what questions do you guys have for me?
I'll get us off, Dr. Collier, if you don't mind. I love the imagery. I love the connection to kind of the somatic experience and kind of looking at it from all of those angles. I'm just wondering, like, you mentioned some of the personal motivations, some of the professional motivations. I guess I'm curious to hear a little bit about what you see next for kind of this intervention as you continue to develop it.
Well, this is a great question. I just did this training for the Houston Counseling Association, excuse me, and I got some really great ideas from some of the counselors, and a couple of the counselors that use FOO Mapping here, after I trained them, one of my interns said, we really should do a FOO group. And so I sent an email out to about 50 people that I'd done FOO maps for in the past couple of years, and a 7-person FOO group populated within 7 minutes. I was so happy to see. So I actually have a wait list for people who want me to open up another section, but it actually has been up and running for about a year and a month, the FOO group. And we just do once a month, but it could be really literally weekly if I had more time to do that. But here's what we did, which was a little different than a traditional psychotherapy group. We had everybody share their FOO maps with the people in the group. So they literally got up on the whiteboard in our group room and they drew their button. And then we were able to put their button in a 3-ring binder. Now, every month when we check in, we talk about what's going on with us and ask for help and support in noticing the awareness, like, when does the button get pushed? Was it pushed? How is it manifesting? And then